Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be talking about dams, and more dams, those dams. We have three dams I've been talking about recently. We have China with the Three Gorges Dam, and actually that dam got started in trouble in 1931, and I'll have more about that in a bit here. And we recently had North Carolina, that was also about a dam. Texas, it's all about dams and overflow. The dams are not breaking. They overflow after lots of rain. Then they're forced to do a dam release, which escalates flooding in the area. And these are words that you won't hear anybody talking about because they're so busy on social media blaming Trump and the not having the weather people and blah, 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 blah. So let's talk about dams. 1931 in China, getting to that in a second, but they have known for a long time. I have a list of the U.S. patents, the patents involved in weather modification. Starting in 1891, U.S. patent method of producing rainfall. 1914, rainmaker, balloon images. 1917, they did some poisonous gas stuff for warfare. 1920, they did process and apparatus for the production of intense artificial clouds, fogs, or mist. 1924, composition for dispelling fogs. 1927, process of producing smoke clouds from moving aircraft. So, leading up to 1931, they well had knowledge of how to make rain, right? Seeding rain is quite a simple thing to do. That is what the trick is, not any more complicated than that. But before I get started, just some common sense here. There's some things that you should be teaching your children to do in emergency. There's things their phones can actually do. And I have the full list down below. I'm not going to read through every second of it, but remember this. Children need to be taught how to survive in an emergency. They need to know, are there any features on their phone? Some of these phones actually have SOS features on them. I prefer that you learn this for yourself, though. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Learn what your phones are, what capabilities it has. Do your kids know their home address memorized? Is there a panic button set up around the house? Do children understand the risk even in calling 911? So have a safety plan for those kiddos. Personally, I wouldn't be letting them out of my sight, but hey, that's just me. So how did this all get started? Well, they always have to cause and effect, right? We're talking first the Three Gorges Dam in China. Luckily, I had done this page a few years ago when I was looking at all the major incidents that they have tried to kill us with these eugenics things. And I remembered the listing I had about China. So I'll tell you about that here and also a link to that page. Excess rainfall over central China in July and August of 1931 triggered the most deadly natural disaster in world history, the Central China Flood of 1931. The Yangtze River, where we're talking about, overtopped its banks as spring snow melt and mingled with the over 24 inches of rain that fell during the month of July alone. So, according to the nature of disaster in China, the 1931 Yangtze River flood, the flood inundated almost 70,000 square miles and turned the Yangtze into what looked like a giant lake or ocean. Contemporary government members put the number of dead at around 2 million, but other agencies, including NOAA, say it has been as many as 3.7 million people were destroyed. So the 1931 Central China floods, and that led to them getting the Three Gorges Dam. See, there's always a cause and effect, right? So the Yangtze River Basin primarily includes the Yellow River, Huai River, and other tributaries in central and eastern China. And these names you'll hear often. Provinces impacted: Hubei, Hunan, Jiangsu, Anu, Jiangsu, and parts of Henan. So you hear those words and you know you're in the right region, right? So they say it was unusual spring or snow melt from the mountains. And with the monsoon rainfall, they had over 24 inches of rain during July of 1931 alone. And then a series of cyclones struck China between July and August, intensifying the rainfall. So essentially, the soil got saturated. the land was already saturated from above average rainfall since late 1930. So, huge area, 70,000 square miles. The Yangtze River expanded to appear more like an inland sea than a river. Some towns and cities went underwater for over 3 months. Yeah, 3 months. Widespread destruction of levees, dikes, and embankments built during the Qing and Republican eras. So they're saying about close to 4 million people were drowned, or it could have been flood-related drownings, famine, and disease outbreaks. So why was the impact so catastrophic? Well, there were no major flood control infrastructure existing at the time. Poor communication and disaster relief coordination during the Republican era. Large-scale deforestation and farming weakened the watersheds. Densely populated floodplains along the Yangtze worsened exposure. Disease and starvation followed the physical flood damage. So what was the response and aftermath? Well, national government lacked resources to respond effectively. Foreign aid from missionaries and Red Cross groups were mobilized, but not at scale. It sparked new thinking in China about hydraulic engineering. Do you imagine that, right? It sparked a need for dams, levees, and hydropower infrastructure. So, the devastation of 1931 helped lay the ideological foundation for the Three Gorges Dam, which was planned since the 1950s, but built in 1994 to 2012. Boy, it's lucky they had all that rain in 1931, isn't it? A national push for hydraulic modernization under Mao and later Deng happened at that time. So yeah, all they had to do was oversee the area of too much snow, too much water, flush it all off the ground, and there you got your floods, right? So that was what created the so-called need to put in this Three Gorges Dam, which my total nonstop full stop opinion is these dams were built for what's going on right now to be the final wedge in the hammer of destruction to a whole lot of innocent people. So they say that dams have reduced downstream flood severity, but they introduce new risks. Structural failure due to seismic aging. Pay attention to that part. Upstream landslides, reservoir-induced earthquakes, social displacement, and environmental destruction. So they claim climate change and extreme rainfall still threaten the Yangtze Basin, especially during monsoon times, which runs from June until August every year. So along that river, after the 1931, they had a 1998 Yangtze floods, over 3,000 dead, 14 million homeless. In 2020, they had the Yangtze flood crisis, tested the limits of the Three Gorges Dam. And now the ongoing sedimentation and pollution concerns in the Three Dam Reservoir. So let's take a look at the whole thing. So first, they're always talking about they need these dams and stuff to divert the water, but they're putting in these big hydro things to supposedly bring us electricity, right? Well, I don't believe that for a hot second, right? But here supposedly is how they get the generated power over to the electricity grid, okay? How power is generated and transmitted from dams, water flow and turbines. The dam holds back a reservoir of water. Okay, we got that part. When water is released from the reservoir, it flows through intake tunnels or penstocks, large pipes, down to the turbines. The force of flowing water spins the turbines. Turbines drive the generators. Each turbine is connected to an electrical generator. As a turbine spins, it turns the generator rotor, converting mechanical energy into electrical energy via electromagnetic induction. Powerhouse and power stations. The powerhouse is the facility built at the dam where turbines and generators are housed. The electricity generated here is typically at a medium voltage. And they have step-up transformers. Near the powerhouse, transformers step up or increase the voltage to a higher transmission voltage. Higher voltage reduces energy loss when electricity is sent over long distances. Transmission lines. The high voltage electricity is carried away from the dam via overhead or underground transmission lines. These lines connect to the regional or national electric grid. Substations and step-down transformers. Near populated areas or industrial users, substations reduce voltage to safer levels for distribution. Distribution lines then deliver the power to homes, businesses, and industries. So they say the dam's powerhouse is the actual power station where mechanical energy from flowing water becomes electrical energy. Okay, I understand how this is working. I'm just not sure about the whole theory. And then they say the power generated there is stepped up by transformers to high voltages for transmission. Okay, understand that part. High voltage power lines carry electricity from the dam's power station to substations and eventually to end users. Well, I'm really stuck on all that stuff. Sure they say all this stuff, but has your electricity bill gone down because they've got all these hydro things going on? No, of course not. Our electricity bills continue to escalate, right? So what are some of the major concerns with the Three Gorges Dam? Well, shortly after its 2003 filling, inspectors detected around 80 hairline cracks in the dam. Officials stated they were repaired and within design tolerances, but critics doubt long-term durability. Seismic risks. The dam sits atop the Yangtze and Ziggy faults. Water pressure changes have triggered hundreds of small tremors, and experts warn reservoir-induced seismicity could exacerbate fault instability. So right off the bat, they built it on a fault line. It's full of cracks. Okay, I'll keep reading. Landslides and bank erosion. Rapid reservoir level fluctuations have destabilized slopes. Over 4,600 landslide events were recorded in 11 months after initial filling. More than 7,400 hazardous points have been identified since then. Sedimentation and water pollution. Slowed river flow traps silt, gravel, pollution, and industrial runoff. This has caused harbor blockage and water quality degradation. Managing sediment and pollution has required massive investments. And remember, Three Gorges was their biggest and their finest of their whole adventures, right? The one that we could all rely upon. Ecosystem decline. The dam has disrupted fish migration, reduced downstream yields by up to 70%, and contributed to extinction of species like the dolphin. Social and cultural costs. Between 1.1 and 1.4 million people were displaced, and nearly 1,300 archaeological sites were submerged. Resettlements often shifted residents to unstable, landslide-prone terrains. Yeah, what happens is at least they're doing it now, when they move in with these dams, of course, they always start with the poor people, right? Because they're easier to push around. So what happens basically, just in a nutshell, is all those millions of poor people get shoved off that land, right? Well, they're poor. So how far do they go? Well, they go within that same region. So when you get these overflows, what it is the poor people have now built up cities and stuff into these areas. So they're usually the ones that get hit with all of these overflows, right? And the way they're doing it in China is they're not even telling them. So all of a sudden buzzing around your little village and stuff, and all of a sudden you're hit with a wall of water and your whole village is submerged. And that's exactly what's going on right now. So they push around the poor people to make it happen. So China operates a coordinated cascade of dams on the Yangtze. See, it's not always just one dam. The Three Gorges Dam, but you got up all of the Yangtze River, you got all these other dams. And we'll have the same picture going on in Texas here in a minute. So China operates a coordinated cascade of dams on the Yangtze and its tributaries for flood control, power, and navigation. The system includes major dams such as the Three Gorges Dam, the Geshua Dam, and these other ones I can't even pronounce. They're also on another river near them. So upstream dams retain peak flows during heavy rains, reducing downstream flood risk. But they use coordinated releases of water and they produce electricity while maintaining reserve safety. Navigation stability, controlled flows ensure consistent shipping levels below the Guangzhou and the Three Gorges. So they say that gradual releases, in other words, if a dam has too much water, gradual releases support downstream ecosystems, though balancing this with power generation remains complex. So I have all the details if you want to dig more into the details, but basically, the Three Gorges Dam faces significant long-term challenges: structural integrity, seismic activity, landslides, sediment buildup, water pollution, ecosystem damage, and social displacement. It operates as a central piece of a vast integrated dam system aimed at flood control, hydropower production, and navigation support. I would caution you to think that any of this is about help, right? Really, this is about they basically flooded the Yangtze River area in the 1931s. They said, oh, wait a minute, we'll get a dam and we'll fix this whole problem. No, actually, the dam is making it far worse. So let's talk about the dam on in Texas. So I was sitting around thinking about the latest events because China's underwater right now. We had North Carolina and now we have Texas. And I started thinking, I thought, gee, they were talking about overflow and water. And I started wondering, are there any dams in the area? Well, yeah, there are dams in the area. So, there's dams on the upper Guadalupe River. They have the Canyon Lake and the Canyon Dam. And those were constructed around 1958 to 1964. So they also have the Ingram Dam. They have the Caryville Lake Dam. So there's a lot of dams in the area, okay? And the dams on the lower Guadalupe River are managed hydroelectric reservoirs, okay? So those are supposedly to generate electricity. Here again, where's the cheap electricity? Doesn't seem to be any, right? So there's a whole bunch of dams there that were starting to be built around 1927, 1928, 1931. So a lot of the dams there were pretty early. And then there's some dams that were built later, but basically we're looking at a dam structure. The Lakewood Dam, 1931, Lake Gonzales Dam, 1928, Lake Dunlop, 1928. So right about the same time that they were flooding the Yangtze River, right, with all that water, they were coming up with these dams. So I don't know where this one is. So anyway, so I have a list of the dams down below, and I have extensive show notes over my website that will list all of these dams, what year they were built, and what kind of specific dams they are. But for today's purposes, what we're looking for is why. And you need to have some pretty tricky wording if you go to look for answers, because everybody on social media is about blowing their brains out, complaining about Trump and nobody got warned and this and that, and they're all missing the main picture, right? So that's why these people on social media get these big followings, right? I checked in with those Midas touch people, the ones that are overtaking Joe Rogan. they're literally doing a show about every 5 minutes about blaming Trump for the floods in Texas. Well, before you get too engaged with people like the Midas Touch, you might want to take a look at who they are. I mean, I think they should point the flashlight back on their own ugly faces, if you ask me. Midas Touch, I saw this quick interview with Katie Couric. Now, I quickly looked at it. It was an hour interview. I just looked at the intro, but the main Midas Touch guy, the guy named Ben, there's three brothers. In the intro, he kind of said she was asking him how they all got together to do this fabulous podcast. And he kind of said, well, at the time I was in Bakersfield working with some poor people. And I thought, something about the way he said that struck me as odd, right? So anyway, so the three brothers get together to save America from Trump, right? Well, I think we need to save ourselves from these people in general, right? So who are they? Well, the Midas Touch, the Ben, the main guy, I'm just going to give you an overview. He actually did an internship at P. Diddy's Bad Boy Records when he was in high school. So they have a long connection. The dad is an attorney who's a major, major attorney in the music business, and he was introduced to the current wife by P. Diddy. And P. Diddy actually took him shopping for his first date with his first wife. So, yeah, the family is very involved in the music business. What a filthy, filthy business. And now they're on social media telling the rest of us how we should all turn against this person or that person. Well, I think we need to just get clear eyes about who we're listening to, right? I mean, that little weasel sits there about every 5 minutes. Trump did this to us. Trump did this. Well, let's take a look at what your family's doing to the children and let's have a fair conversation. But anyways, I'm slipping off track here, so I'll contain myself at this point. So yeah, I don't know why people don't ever look at who they're listening to. But anyway, so let's get back to reality here. So what happened? So Texas Hill Country Flash Flood. It was location in Kerr County, Texas. So a stalled storm system dumped up to 15 inches of rain over the hill country in just a few hours. The Guadalupe River surged over 20 feet in under 2 hours, creating a near record height of 29 feet. Flash flood emergency was issued by the National Weather Service at 4 a.m. on July the 4th. What was the impact? Widespread devastation downstream. You hear those words, downstream. Pay attention to that, especially at summer camps like Camp Mystic. At least 78 people dead, including many children, over 40 missing, and that's still continuing to today. And here's where it gets tricky. When you go on social media and start to look, it says, well, this was not a dam collapse, but rather extreme flash flooding triggered by a high volume rain event. Okay, we got that straight, right? So, I'll get to the part here in a second where I'm not going to go through every single dam because I've got them all. If you want to know every single dam, I've got them all listed down below. And I've been trying to give you complete show notes so you can see exactly how I got here. So, yeah, so these dams, there's several in the Kerrville area, and they have hydroelectric or recreation or water supply or flood control, as they claim is their thing, okay? So, when I started looking for it, did anybody release any water? Okay. And that's where it got tricky. It took me some work to get there. So, like the Ingram Dam, I found that went over top on July the 4th. Water flowed over the top due to heavy rainfall. But here's where the trick is, okay? It said no structural breach. Well, that's good. No intentional release. A passive overflow, not a failure. So yeah, because these dams are set to overflow or have releases once they get full to protect the dam. So in events like this, the wording gets very tricky because people will say things like, well, they minimize the overflow, like, well, we saved the dam, we just let out all the water, and they blow past that part, right? Because they act like, well, we had to do it because we had to save the dam, right? So it's kind of like saying, well, I had to keep the gun because I need to keep killing, right? So Yeah, so they get really fishy when you try to get answers out of was there any overflow or any releases? Yeah, so right here they said it was a passive overflow, but not a failure. Well, yeah, because all the wording is set to make it look like not a failure, right? So I picked up on another one too that said, let me put this on hold for a second. Okay, here's where I dug into it. The Canyon Dam, okay? July the 4th through the 5th, the lake rose 6 to 10 feet due to rain, reaching 888 feet. July the 5th to the 6th, controlled outflow was released. There you got it, right? That was when the water got released. And that was where they'll say, well, the dam wasn't broken. Nothing happened to the dam. Well, yes, it is working as functioning because it's set to have, when it has too much water, it's supposed to release, or they release it on it, right? So they say the purpose to prevent spillover by lowering pressure on the dam. And they said it helped manage flood risk, but did not cause the flood. So, yeah, well, we can split hairs all we want, right? But water came out of those dams. So this is the Ingram Dam. Ingram Dam. It's a low head structure. July the 4th, 4 a.m. Overtopped. Okay, overtopped. Hear those words? Due to flash flood surge. So that means overtopped, meaning water came over. But the dam remained intact. No gates opened and no breach. But what was the effect? Sudden overflow contributed to surge toward Caryville and Hunt. So yeah, that is exactly what happened. They say what caused the flood? A stalled storm dumped 10 to 15 inches of rain in hours. Upstream creeks and tributaries overflowed into the Guadalupe River. Rivers rose 26 to 29 feet in a flash flood event, overwhelming all local infrastructure. They say it was not caused by that no dam was breached. No dam released water intentionally to cause harm. Controlled release from Canyon Dam was minor in comparison to rainfall total. So you see, in several places here, the wording indicates to me that yes, they did in fact release water, but they're just minimizing what happened, right? And then they say misconceptions addressed. Social media rumors falsely blamed intentional dam releases. I didn't see any of those, but I don't cruise the whole world with social media. But basically, what I saw when I looked around was everybody was just focused on blaming Trump. So authorities confirmed no gates were open at the Ingram Dam. Canyon Dam functioned as designed, helping prevent even worse damage. You see those words? Helping prevent even worse damage. So what they're saying is, well, some water came over the top, but worse damage would have been if the whole dam had erupted, right? So let's look at the summary. The Canyon Dam, there was no breach, no overflow, but they released small, controlled outflows, and it performed well. The Ingram Dam, overtopped due to rain, but not structural fail. Flood caused by extreme rainfall, not dam infrastructure or manipulation. So yeah, I think you can split this however way you want to split it, but from my viewpoint, they appear to be very cagey in how they're taking care of all this stuff, right? So global pattern, dam-driven flood complexity. North Carolina, recent dam overflow incident. China, major dam zone hit by extreme rain. Texas, flash flooding near multiple dams. The pattern, excessive rainfall, natural or possibly engineered, fills reservoirs. When water must be released or overtops spillways, it creates destructive downstream surges. Dams are both flood control assets and potential amplifiers of disaster when overwhelmed. Well, I'm in the category, I believe dams were meant to destroy. And remember, a few years ago, I talked about the native Indians. Well, they got tricked by dams. As a matter of fact, there was a clause. Well, the U.S. broke every treaty, but in one of the treaties, the Indians were glad to sign it because the treaty was written to say, like, well, as long as the buffalo roam, you would have this land. Well, then what the U.S. government do? Well, they went in and had massive buffalo butcherings. They slaughtered buffalo, wild Bill Cody. Massive amounts of buffalo were then destroyed. And they also put up dams to flow the water away from the buffalo. So that would help kill off the buffalo. So they grabbed that land. So I see a pretty long history of dams and land being stolen and things happening because of how they're doing this trickery, right? So I don't remember, I'm just talking out of the top of my head, but yeah, it did happen with the Indians, and they never imagined that they would be without the buffalo. Well, they fixed that when they went in and slaughtered all the buffalo and then built these dams to divert the water away. So the Indians would not only have water for the buffalo, they wouldn't have water for their own crops. So I don't think it's any kind of conspiracy. I've been doing research. This is based on solid information. So I'm 100% in the camp that dams were built for right now and right how this whole eugenics thing is going to play out because it's a disaster in plain sight that nobody is looking at. And if you're in some country and you're near a dam, I would make sure that you know where those dams are, and I would make sure you have a plan for when that thing hits because they're building dams all over the place because it is, in fact, at least this is just my opinion, another form of this eugenics profile. So be safe out there. Goodbye for now.